I dreamed of a quiet, peaceful weekend when I would finally be able to devote all my time to myself. After the constant hustle and bustle of my life, it felt like life was just passing me by, leaving me with nothing but worries and unfinished business. 2 past marriages that ended in betrayal left me with the conviction that perhaps singleness was my destiny. But a year ago, I ventured into marriage again and welcomed not only my husband but also his son Jack into my life. We had always had a warm, albeit somewhat detached relationship, and I sometimes felt like he kept me at a distance. When my husband decided to head out of town to his parents' house again, I was sure the weekend would go just as I had planned, with a glass of wine, grooming makeup, and lounging on the couch. But my plans were shattered the moment I got a call from Jack. He said he would be here soon, and I had to hastily rethink my plans for the day. I waited for him, standing at the stove, preparing a late breakfast. The smell of frying bacon wafted throughout the house, giving the illusion of warmth and comfort. Jack walked in, as usual, with dirty shoes, his usual bulky jacket and jeans that hung baggy on him. "Hey, you want something to eat?" I asked, gesturing to the set table. "Sure, why not?" he replied, taking a seat across from me. We started with light topics, talking about school, his friends, the weather. But as breakfast drew to a close, I felt a strange tension in the air, as if some unspoken thought hung between us. After the meal, we cleared the table together, and I noticed Jack moving around the kitchen in a confident but restrained way. There was a new maturity in his movements that I hadn't noticed before. When we finished washing the dishes, the conversation became more open. I learned that Jack dreamed of becoming a financier, investing in companies, creating something of his own. His ambition surprised and even delighted me. "That sounds impressive," I said, smiling sincerely. "Thank you," he replied, a little embarrassed. "We could watch a movie together later, if you want." It had been a long time since we'd spent time just the two of us. I agreed, feeling a slight thrill. This was unusual. Jack and I had never been this close. In the living room, wrapped in plaids, we settled in front of the screen with popcorn. As the movie went on, I felt more and more that something significant was happening between us, something new that we were both afraid to voice. Casual jokes were replaced by more personal stories. We shared thoughts about life, dreams, even fears. I seemed to learn more about Jack in those few hours than I had in our entire year together. I had always seen him as just my husband's son, but now I suddenly realized he was something more. There was a strange sense of closeness in the room, almost palpable. My heart was racing with anxiety, but at the same time I felt an inexplicable attraction. Perhaps it was because I'd been so detached from my own emotions in recent years, hiding behind the familiar role of stepmother. And now that I realized it, all the walls I'd so carefully built up began to crumble. "You know," Jack said, pausing, "I've always felt like you were trying to keep your distance." "I guess it was because I didn't know how to act," I replied, looking at him carefully. We were both new to each other, after all. He was silent, not looking away, and I noticed his hand on the plaid slowly moving closer to mine. My heart was pounding frantically in my chest. It was as if an invisible bond had formed between us, one that pulsed with every breath. It felt wrong, but at the same time it was addictive, making me forget about everything else in the world. "Maybe it's not that important," Jack finally said, his voice low and quiet. "The important thing is that we can be closer now." I felt my thoughts and feelings mingling in my head, and I couldn't figure out how to react to those words. A wave of fear and excitement washed over me, and I didn't know what would happen next. But maybe he was right. We did need to work things out, if only to try to do it for his father, who was always living on both sides of the house. All my life, I didn't try to be liked. I lived my life and I didn't care what anyone thought of me, and maybe that was my mistake. Most people pulled away from me when they didn't get the benefits. The moment Jack spoke, I felt my heart skip a beat. His voice was full of some elusive tension, and though he cut his words short, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had something important to say. After that conversation in the living room, silence fell over the house, filling every room of it. I watched as he stood up and walked up the stairs without another word, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My feelings were mixed, thinking about how Jack had been only a few years ago, and how I saw him now adult and interesting. I decided not to rush things, but when he disappeared behind the door of his room, the urge to talk to him became almost irresistible. An unexpected excitement filled me, and without thinking, I called out to him, trying to keep my voice as casual as possible. "Jack, can you hear me? Jack, can you hear me?" I shouted, raising my voice a little, trying not to let my insistence show. "I have a proposition for you. Will you help me in the kitchen?" I heard him coming downstairs, and when I saw his satisfied smile, I felt strangely warm. He walked into the kitchen, and I started preparing the ingredients for dinner. I noticed how our interaction took on a special, almost ritualistic quality. Chopping vegetables, mixing sauces, and preparing food became more than just cooking. It was a sense of unity. The aroma of fresh garlic buns wafted around us, and the atmosphere was filled with a sense of coziness and calm. "I want to tell you that you're a very good cook, thank you. I know I've never said that before," he said with a slight smile as he watched my actions. "Thank you," I replied, feeling the warmth in my chest. My mom always said it was a way to show love. I think I inherited it from her. He winked, and I suddenly realized how easily I could forget about social norms and expectations when we were together. I could feel a strange tension building between us, something elusive, almost palpable. As I watched his confident movements, I suddenly noticed a change in his gaze, something I hadn't noticed before. When dinner was ready, we sat at the table, enjoying the food we'd made together. Jack was happily spooning pasta onto his fork, and his happy slurping made me smile. There were unspoken questions in the air as we talked about trivia. I felt that some invisible thread had formed between us, a bond that hadn't been there before. "What do you think about everything that is happening in your life?" I dared to ask, expecting his answer to reveal a new side of our relationship. Jack looked at me, his face serious. He sighed heavily. "Honestly, I sometimes feel like I don't live up to all these expectations. Everyone talks about what I should be, but no one is interested in what I really want to be. It's hard." I nodded, trying to show that I understood him. I felt something flutter inside me as I met his gaze. The silence that followed our words was filled with a kind of electric tension. I noticed his eyes glittering with some strange intensity, and that look gave me a slight shiver, as if from a light touch. "Maybe we could watch another movie," I suggested, to lighten the mood. We settled back in the living room, and I poured myself some wine, feeling the warmth of it spread through my body. Jack sat next to me, and his closeness suddenly felt too obvious, too tangible. I couldn't shake the feeling that what was happening between us was more than just a casual rapprochement brought on by privacy and a shared home. We laughed at the movie, but I couldn't fully immerse myself in it, my thoughts wandering somewhere else, around Jack and his gaze I could feel on me. The evening seemed to be slowly revealing new facets to us, things I didn't even know existed. Every casual touch of his hand on mine felt like it was awakening a latent energy in me, like an electric shock going through my body, making me forget about reality. I tried to keep my thoughts in check, but the longer our conversation went on, the harder it was. When Jack suddenly spoke, his voice broke the silence that hung in the air. "Can I ask you something?" His words sounded so sudden that I flinched slightly. "Sure, ask me anything," I said, trying not to let my voice shake. Inside, I felt a twinge of foreboding. Had he noticed something more behind our conversation? Or was it just innocent curiosity? "Being a stepmother," Jack began, his gaze never leaving my face, "must be hard. We got off on the wrong foot. I acted like you were intruding on my life, but now I know you're awesome. But the thing is, I don't see you as a mom, you know that, right? Sometimes I even wish I could spend more time with you. But those thoughts scare me." Jack exhaled and continued, frowning slightly, "I just want you to know that you matter to me, Alice." His words penetrated deep, stirring more than just pride in me. I felt a warm wave of affection spread through my body. It wasn't easy to answer, because I felt something strange between us, subtle but undeniably present. "Thank you, Jack. It means a lot to me," I barely said, meeting his tense gaze with a question that was unspoken. Was it just gratitude, or did I feel that compelling spark between us? The silence grew thicker and thicker, the tension building, as if there was an invisible barrier between us that I wanted to break. I stood up quickly, trying to lighten the mood, and poured myself some more wine. "Let's just keep watching the movie," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual. We settled back on the couch under the same blanket, but now it was hard to focus on the screen. I could feel his presence next to me, hot, almost palpable. It seemed that with every movement and every glance, our souls drew closer together. When morning came, I heard the keys turn in the lock, and a familiar voice cut through the air. "I'm back." It was my husband. There was alarm in his voice as he walked into the living room and saw us on the couch. "What's going on here? What have you been doing?" I was confused, my thoughts were jumbled and I couldn't find the right words right away. My head was cracking with tension. "We were just watching a movie and fell asleep here," I finally answered, but my voice sounded uncertain. "Watching a movie?" My husband raised his eyebrows and stared at us. "Did you pour wine for my son, too?" His voice turned to a shout. I could feel the excitement gripping me. It was innocent, but how could I explain it to him? I didn't know what to say, and it was at that moment that Jack suddenly jumped up and stepped between us. "Father, that's enough," he said sharply. "We were just having a vacation, nothing more. You're acting like you've caught us in something shameful." His defensive stance surprised me and warmed me at the same time. It was the first time he openly took my side. I felt unexpectedly relieved and even protected. Toward lunchtime, the passion began to subside, though tension was still in the air. Jack came over to me when we were alone. "Alice," his voice was quiet, "what happened yesterday was important. Do you understand what I mean?" "Hush, Jack," I grabbed his hand, quickly looking around. "Your father might hear. Let's just leave it at that and not discuss it anymore." He froze for a moment, and then nodded, but there was an unspoken determination in his eyes. I realized that something more than mutual affection had begun between us. The next month turned into a series of agonizing trials. A heavy fog of suspicion and uncertainty enveloped our whole house. It seemed that every step we took, every glance in Jack's direction, caused my husband to flare with indignation. He watched us like a predator watching its prey, listening intently to every word we might exchange and peering out from around the corner as soon as we were alone. I was scared, but I didn't understand why he was so insistent on finding reasons for conflict when, in fact, nothing serious had happened. My relationship with my husband became increasingly cold and distant. In the bedroom, he would turn his back to me and fall asleep so quickly, as if he were deliberately avoiding intimacy. Every time I tried to talk about what had happened and offer a solution, he only got angry, throwing short, harsh words at me. His harshness hurt more deeply than any insult. It was as if we were strangers, as if someone had drawn an insurmountable line between us. Things were different with Jack, on the other hand. Our conversations became more and more personal and warm. He was there for me, supporting me, comforting me when I felt lost. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that even in moments of silence, there was more than just mutual sympathy hovering between us. It was frightening and mesmerizing at the same time. I knew it couldn't go on like this. It's not normal what I'm feeling for Jack, my husband's son. I shouldn't be feeling these impulses that flared up when he was around. I needed to find a way out, to do something to get our family back to normal. I made an appointment for us to see a marriage counselor. It was probably my last hope to mend our relationship with my husband. I knew he hated the idea, didn't want to let an outsider into our personal problems, but it was the only way out. For too long we had already silenced our fears and resentments, too deeply buried everything inside, and now it seemed that any attempts to improve our relationship without outside help were doomed to failure. My husband came to the first session gloomy and depressed. I could see in his eyes a mixture of fatigue and distrust. We sat across from each other, with the couch between us, like a border separating two different universes. The psychologist suggested that we start simple, each of us should share our feelings and fears. When it was my turn, I tried to be frank. I said that I felt abandoned, that I was hurt by his coldness and that he was avoiding me as if I were a leper. That I missed him, the old, warm, caring man. When I finished, the psychologist turned to my husband and invited him to speak. "I'm disgusted," he said sharply, not even looking at me. "I know there's something going on between you and Jack. It's not just maternal affection, I can feel it." Those words hit me like a thunderclap. I expected anything but such a blatant accusation. The room spun around me, and my husband's gaze pierced through me. I couldn't believe he'd said that out loud, right in front of the counselor. Jack heard those words, too, and I felt my reality crumble. Something inside of me snapped. I felt like our interactions with Jack were really starting to take up more space in my life than they should. Maybe my husband was right, and that was what scared me the most. But I knew one thing: I couldn't lose everything, and I had to choose between my relationship with my husband or my strange attachment to his son.